The alarm on my console screamed before I even understood what my eyes were seeing. I am Kor Ashen, sensor officer aboard the Imperial Dreadnought Vel Karoon, and in all my 12 years of service, I had never heard that particular alarm before. It was not the tone for a meteor field. It was not the tone for a rival fleet. It was a tone reserved for something our systems could not classify at all. I gripped the edge of my console as the bridge lights shifted to a deep amber. Around me, officers who had served through 3 border conflicts froze in place, staring at their own screens with the same confusion twisting their faces. "Report," barked Fleet Commander Draven Ux, his voice cutting through the sudden murmur on the bridge. I forced my hands to move across the controls, pulling every scan array we had toward the anomaly. "Commander, there is a vessel at bearing 310. It was not there a moment ago." "Impossible. Nothing enters this sector without a jump flare. Our long-range sensors would have caught the distortion minutes before arrival." "I understand that, sir, but it is here. No flare, no warp signature, no emissions trail of any kind leading to its position. It is simply present." The silence that followed was worse than any alarm. On the main view screen, the image sharpened as our optical arrays adjusted. A ship hung in the black, framed by distant starlight. It was not enormous by the standards of Imperial fleets, but its shape was wrong in a way that made my skin prickle. Sharp angles met smooth curves in patterns that no shipyard in known space would ever produce. There were no visible weapon ports that matched any database we carried, no insignia we recognized. No flag, no marking, nothing that told us who built it or why it was here. "Run it against every registry," Commander Ux ordered. "Trade guilds, mercenary bands, pirate factions, everything." I ran the comparison myself, watching line after line of data scroll past with the same result each time. "No match found. No match found. No match found." "Sir," I said quietly, "there is no record of this hull design anywhere in Imperial archives." Draven Ux stepped closer to the view screen, his 4 eyes narrowing as he studied the strange vessel floating there in silence. "Then it is something new, a species we have not yet catalogued. Attempt contact on all standard frequencies." Communications Officer Vel Tarnu began broadcasting our standard greeting protocol, the same message the Empire had used for centuries when meeting unknown ships. It offered peaceful terms, requested identification, and warned of consequences for hostile intent. We had used this exact message 1,000 times before, and 1,000 times before, ships had responded within moments, whether with peace or with fear. This time, there was nothing. No response, no shift in the ship's position, no change in its readings at all. It simply sat there, as still as a held breath, watching us the way a predator watches prey it has already decided is not worth chasing. "Send it again," Ux ordered. Perhaps our translation matrix failed to parse their language. Vel Tarnu repeated the message. Still nothing. I kept my eyes locked on my scanner readouts, searching for any change, any flicker of engine activity, any hint of what this vessel intended to do. The Vel Karoon was not alone. Behind us, arranged in the disciplined formation any officer would recognize instantly, sat 4 escort cruisers and 2 support vessels, the full weight of the 9th Border Fleet. We had crushed pirate armadas twice our size. We had subdued rebellious colonies without losing a single ship. The idea that one unidentified vessel could pose any real threat to a fleet of this size seemed, on its face, almost laughable. And yet nobody on that bridge was laughing. "Sir," I said, "I am detecting something odd in its hull composition. Our scans are having difficulty penetrating the outer layer. It is almost as if parts of the ship are absorbing our sensor pulses rather than reflecting them." "Explain that in terms that make sense, Ashen." "I cannot, sir. Nothing about this ship makes sense to me right now." Draven Ux exhaled slowly through his nose slits, a habit he had when frustration crept toward the edge of his composure. He turned to his second-in-command, a sharp-featured officer named Isla Korash, who had served with him since his earliest days as a captain. "Options," he said simply. Isla stepped forward, her posture rigid. "Sir, Protocol states that any unidentified vessel refusing standard hailing procedures within a settled or monitored zone may be considered a potential threat. We are well within our rights to demand compliance through more forceful means. A single ship against 7, Ux muttered. It would be over before it began. I wanted to speak, wanted to voice the unease building in my chest, but I held my tongue. It was not my place to question tactical decisions, only to provide the data that shaped them. Still, something about the stillness of that vessel unsettled me more than any aggressive maneuver could have. "Helm," Ux said, "bring us to a firing position. Weapons, charge forward batteries. We will send one clear message. If they do not respond to words, perhaps they will respond to a demonstration." "Understood, sir," came the reply from the weapons station. I watched the tactical display as our dreadnought began a slow, deliberate turn, aligning its forward batteries with the unmoving vessel. Around us, the escort cruisers shifted formation to flank the target, a maneuver so familiar to this crew that it barely required verbal coordination anymore. We had performed this dance countless times before, always ending the same way, with the other side either surrendering, fleeing, or being disabled within moments. "Target locked," the weapons officer reported. Commander Ux studied the viewscreen one final time, his expression unreadable. "Fire one warning shot, wide of the hull. Let them understand the cost of silence." "Firing," the weapons officer confirmed. I watched the readout as the discharge left our forward battery, a streak of energy racing across the black toward a point calculated to pass just beside the strange vessel's hull, close enough to demonstrate our capability, far enough to avoid actual contact. It was meant to be nothing more than a statement, a show of strength, the kind of gesture that had ended 100 standoffs before this one without a single shot needing to find its mark. The shot never reached its intended path. I saw it happen on my own screen, the trajectory line I had calculated moments before suddenly interrupted by something my sensors could not explain. The energy discharge simply stopped, as if it had struck an invisible wall long before reaching the vessel it was meant to pass beside. There was no explosion, no visible impact, nothing but an abrupt and silent end to our warning shot's existence. The bridge fell into a silence I had never experienced before in all my years of service. Nobody spoke, nobody moved. Every eye turned toward the view screen, toward that strange, unmoving ship that had just made our most advanced weaponry disappear, as if it were nothing more than a passing thought. "Report," Commander Ux said, and for the first time since I had known him, his voice carried the faintest tremor. "Sir," I said, my throat suddenly dry. The shot did not reach the target. Something intercepted it roughly 400 units from the vessel's hull. I detected no visible defense mechanism, no energy signature consistent with any shielding technology in our records. Then what stopped it? I had no answer for him. None of us did. On the view screen, the strange ship remained exactly where it had been, silent and still, as though the destruction of our warning shot had been such a minor event that it did not warrant so much as a shift in position. It felt less like we were facing an enemy vessel and more like we were standing before something that had already decided, long before we arrived, exactly how this encounter would unfold. "Sir," Isla said quietly, "orders." Draven Ux stared at the screen for a long moment before answering, and in that pause, I understood something none of us wanted to admit aloud. We had come here expecting to catalog an unknown vessel, perhaps subdue it, perhaps welcome it into the fold of imperial influence the way we had done with 1,000 species before. We had not come here expecting to feel, for the first time in generations, that we might be the ones standing on the weaker side of an encounter. "Hold position," Ux finally said. "Full alert. Charge all batteries. We will not fire again until I give the order, but we will not be caught unprepared either." I turned back to my console, my hands trembling slightly as I continued scanning for any hint of what that vessel truly was. Every instinct told me that whatever had just intercepted our shot with such effortless precision was not finished revealing what it could do. And somewhere deep in my chest, Beneath the training and the discipline that had shaped my entire career, a quiet voice whispered that the universe I had understood only moments before no longer applied to whatever was happening on that bridge that day. The silence stretched on, and none of us dared to break it. Minutes passed like hours on that bridge. Nobody sat. Nobody relaxed. The strange vessel remained motionless on the view screen, its dark hull swallowing the light of distant stars, giving away nothing about the intentions of whoever, or whatever, sat behind its controls. Commander Draven Ux paced a slow line behind the command chair, his hands folded tightly behind his back. I had served under him long enough to recognize the signs of a man forcing calm onto a mind that wanted anything but calm. He stopped, finally, and turned to Isla Korash. Status of the fleet. All ships report full readiness, sir. Weapons charged, shields at maximum, no further movement from the target vessel. And still no response to our hails. None, sir. Ux exhaled and turned back toward the screen, studying the ship as though sheer focus might reveal some hidden truth about it. I understood the feeling. My own eyes kept drifting back to the readouts on my console, searching for anything that might explain how a single, unmarked vessel had swatted aside one of our warning shots as though it were nothing more than a passing insect. It was Vel Tarnu, our communications officer, who broke the silence next. Sir, I am detecting an incoming transmission, single channel, directed specifically at our bridge frequency. Every head on that bridge turned toward the communications station. Put it through, Ux ordered. There was a brief pause, filled with the soft static of an opening channel, and then a voice filled the bridge. It was not the voice any of us expected. It carried none of the aggression we had prepared ourselves to hear, none of the posturing that so many hostile encounters had taught us to anticipate. Instead, it was calm, measured, almost conversational, in a way that felt more unsettling than any threat could have been. This is Captain Ethan Marsh, commanding officer of the vessel you are currently targeting. I would ask that your fleet stand down and cease preparations for further weapons fire. The bridge fell utterly silent. I glanced at Commander Ux, watching the muscles along his jaw tighten as he processed the sheer audacity of the statement. A single ship, facing an entire Imperial fleet, was calmly requesting that we stand down, as though the balance of power in this encounter was somehow reversed from what logic and every law of warfare dictated it should be. This is Fleet Commander Draven Ux of the Imperial 9th Border Fleet, he said, his voice steady despite the tension coiled beneath it. You have entered a sector under Imperial jurisdiction without proper identification, without responding to standard hailing protocols, and you have destroyed ordnance fired in accordance with lawful warning procedures. Identify your point of origin and state your intentions immediately, or face the consequences of continued non-compliance. There was a brief pause on the other end, long enough that I began to wonder if the channel had closed. Then the voice returned, still calm, still unhurried. My intentions are simple, Commander. You have entered space that is currently being monitored. I was sent to observe and, if necessary, to make clear that this territory is not open for unilateral claims. Your warning shot was intercepted because it posed a risk to my vessel. Nothing more. I have no wish for conflict here today. You speak as though a single ship holds the authority to dictate terms to an entire fleet, Ux replied, his tone hardening. Perhaps you are unaware of the history of the empire you now address. We have brought order to 1,000 systems. We have subdued forces far greater in number than what you command here alone. I am aware of your empire's history, Commander. I am also aware that history rarely accounts for what has not yet been encountered. The words hung in the air, quiet and unthreatening in tone, yet somehow carrying more weight than any battle cry could have. I saw Isla Korash shift uncomfortably beside the command chair, her eyes flicking toward Ux as though silently urging caution. But caution, in that moment, was not the mood that filled the bridge. Insult was. The idea that a single vessel, alone against 6 warships, would speak to an Imperial fleet commander with such measured confidence struck many on that bridge as an affront that could not go unanswered. You test my patience, Ux said. I will offer you one opportunity to withdraw peacefully from this sector. Refuse, and you will be treated as a hostile combatant. There was another pause, shorter this time, and when the voice returned, there was something almost regretful in its tone, though it never wavered from its calm and steady delivery. I understand your position, Commander. I hope you understand mine as well. I did not come here seeking conflict, but I will not withdraw simply because I am outnumbered. If your fleet chooses to engage, I will respond accordingly. The channel closed. For a long moment, nobody on the bridge spoke. I felt the weight of what had just happened settle over the room like a physical thing. An unknown captain, from an unknown species, aboard a single unmarked vessel, had just informed an entire Imperial battle fleet that he would not retreat, and that any attack against him would be met with a response. Commander Ux turned slowly to face his officers, his expression a mixture of disbelief and simmering anger. Helm, maintain position. Weapons, prepare full spread. If this captain believes a single ship can stand against 6, then we will demonstrate the folly of that belief in terms he cannot misunderstand. Sir, I said, before I could stop myself, may I offer an observation? Ux turned toward me, his gaze sharp. Speak, Ashen. The way that vessel intercepted our warning shot troubles me. We detected no defensive countermeasure activating, no shield frequency, nothing consistent with known technology. If a single warning shot could be neutralized so completely without any visible mechanism, I am concerned that a full engagement may not unfold the way we expect it to. You believe a single ship can withstand a coordinated assault from 6 vessels, Ashen? I do not know what to believe, sir. That is precisely what concerns me. Ux studied me for a long moment, and I saw something flicker behind his eyes, something that might have been doubt, quickly buried beneath the weight of pride and duty. We are the Empire, Ashen. We have never lost a battle to a single vessel, regardless of its origin. Whatever this ship represents, it will learn the same lesson every other challenger has learned before it. He turned back to face the view screen, his voice rising to address the entire bridge. All ships, converge on the target. Full weapons spread on my mark. We will end this quickly. I turned back to my console, my hands steady out of years of training, even as my mind screamed with quiet unease. I ran one final scan across the strange vessel, searching for any final piece of information that might prove useful in the coming exchange. The readings remained as strange and unyielding as they had been from the very beginning, offering nothing but more questions. All ships report ready, Isla Korash confirmed. Commander Ux straightened, his gaze fixed on the view screen, on that lone vessel sitting silently amid the vastness of space, unmoved by the 6 warships now converging around it with weapons charged and ready. Fire. The order left his mouth with a finality that seemed to echo through the entire bridge. I watched as, across our formation, 6 ships unleashed their full weapons spread simultaneously, a coordinated barrage of energy that had ended countless conflicts before this one almost instantly. Streaks of light lanced across the black toward that single unmarked vessel, converging from every angle with a precision built from centuries of Imperial warfare doctrine. For a fraction of a second, I allowed myself to believe that this would end exactly as Commander Ux expected, that the strange vessel would be overwhelmed, disabled, perhaps destroyed outright, and that this encounter would become nothing more than another entry in the long list of Imperial victories against unknown challengers. Then my sensors registered something that made my breath catch in my throat. The incoming barrage, every single shot from all 6 of our ships, simply stopped, not deflected, not absorbed in any way that matched known shielding technology. They simply ceased to exist, as though some invisible boundary around that vessel refused to allow them passage into whatever space it occupied. The bridge erupted into a chaos of raised voices and disbelieving murmurs. I stared at my readouts, running the calculation again and again, certain that some error in my instruments must be responsible for what I was seeing. But the data remained consistent no matter how many times I checked it. Every shot fired by our fleet had been neutralized without a single one finding its mark. Report, Ux demanded, his voice tight with a fury barely held in check. "Sir," I said, my voice barely steady, "all incoming fire from our fleet has been stopped. I detect no impact on the target vessel's hull, no debris, no energy residue consistent with any known defense system. It is as though our weapons simply ceased to function the moment they came within range of that ship." Silence swallowed the bridge whole. On the view screen, the strange vessel remained exactly where it had been from the very start, undisturbed by an attack that should have, by every measure of Imperial military doctrine, ended the confrontation before it had truly begun. And in that silence I understood, with a certainty that chilled me far more than any threat could have, that we were no longer the ones in control of what happened next. The quiet did not last long. Before Commander Ux could issue another order, before any of us could fully process what had just happened, the tactical display in front of me lit up with a fresh wave of alerts. I felt my stomach twist as I read the incoming data, each line worse than the last. "Sir, the escort cruiser Saren Vok has lost primary engine function. No visible damage to the hull. Their weapon systems are also reporting failure across the board." "Same here," called out the officer, monitoring our secondary support vessel. "The Halvan Ost is reporting total loss of propulsion. Life support remains stable, but they are dead in space." I watched, frozen for a moment, as one by one, every ship in our formation began reporting the exact same pattern of failure. Engines disabled, weapons offline. Yet in every single case, life support systems remained untouched, running exactly as they had before the engagement began. "How?" Commander Ux breathed, more to himself than to anyone else on the bridge. "How is a single vessel disabling 6 warships simultaneously without a single visible weapon discharge?" I ran every scan available to me, desperate for an answer that made sense within the framework of everything I had ever learned about warfare and technology. What I found instead only deepened the mystery. There were no visible energy signatures consistent with any known weapon type. No trace of the kind of destructive force that should accompany the disabling of 6 warships. It was as though something had simply reached out, invisible and precise, and quietly turned off every system that made our ships capable of fighting or fleeing, while leaving everything necessary for survival fully intact. "Sir," I said, my voice barely above a whisper, "I do not believe they intend to destroy us." Ux turned toward me sharply. "Explain." "If their goal was destruction, sir, our life support systems would not still be functioning. Our crews would not still be breathing. Whatever weapon they are using, it is disabling our capacity to fight, not our capacity to survive. This is not an attack meant to eliminate us. It is a demonstration." The bridge fell into another heavy silence as the weight of my words settled over everyone present. I could see the disbelief on Commander Ux's face slowly giving way to something far more troubling, the dawning realization that everything he had understood about warfare, about the natural order of power in this part of the galaxy, no longer applied to whatever was happening around us. On the view screen, the strange vessel remained motionless, exactly where it had been from the moment it first appeared. It had not fired a single visible shot. It had not moved an inch from its original position. And yet, in the span of less than 2 minutes, it had rendered an entire Imperial battle fleet completely helpless. "Status of the Vel Karoon?" Ux asked quietly, almost afraid of the answer. I checked my own console, running a full diagnostic across every system aboard our own ship. "Engines are still functional, sir. Weapons systems remain online. We appear to be the only vessel in the formation that has not been affected." Why would they leave us untouched? I had no answer for that question. None of us did. I glanced around the bridge and saw the same confusion mirrored on every face. Officers who had spent their careers believing in the absolute supremacy of Imperial military technology, now staring at a battlefield that made no sense according to anything they had ever been taught. The silence was broken again by the return of that same calm voice over the open channel, the voice belonging to the human captain who called himself Ethan Marsh. "Commander Ux, I want to make something clear. I have not destroyed your fleet. Your ships remain intact. Your crews remain safe, What I have done is remove your ability to continue this engagement, because continuing it would have ended very differently for your people. Ux's hands curled into fists at his sides, though his voice, when he finally spoke, remained carefully controlled. You could have destroyed us entirely. Why show restraint now? Because destruction was never my objective, the voice replied. I came here to observe, and if necessary, to demonstrate that this sector is not something your empire can simply claim without consequence. I believe that demonstration has been made clear enough. I watched Commander Ux's expression shift through several emotions at once: anger, disbelief, and finally something that looked uncomfortably close to fear, an emotion I had never once seen cross his face in all my years serving under him. What do you want from us now? Ux asked. I would like to speak further, Commander, but not through an open channel where every word becomes a matter of pride and posturing for both our peoples. I am requesting that a representative from your fleet come aboard my vessel so that we may discuss the situation directly, away from the pressures of command and audience. The suggestion hung in the air, heavy with implications none of us were prepared to fully process. To send someone aboard an unknown vessel, one that had just disabled an entire fleet without firing a single visible shot, felt like an act of enormous risk. And yet, the alternative, continuing to sit here with a crippled fleet and no clear path forward, felt equally untenable. Ux turned to Isla Koresh, his voice low. Thoughts? Sir, I do not believe we are in a position to refuse, she said carefully. If they wished us harm, they have already demonstrated more than enough capability to cause it. Perhaps this is an opportunity to better understand what we are truly dealing with. UX was silent for a long moment, his gaze drifting across the bridge, across the officers who depended on him to make the right choice in a situation that defied every precedent he had ever known. Finally, his eyes settled on me. Ashen, you have shown clearer judgment throughout this engagement than most on this bridge. I want you to go. The words struck me with the force of a physical blow. Sir, I am a censor officer. I have no diplomatic training, no authority to negotiate on behalf of the Empire. You will not be negotiating, Ux said. You will be observing, listening, and reporting back everything you learn. I need eyes and ears aboard that vessel that I can trust to see clearly, not through the lens of wounded pride or fear. You have already proven capable of that today. I wanted to argue further, to insist that someone more qualified take on such a role, but the look in Commander Ux's eyes told me the decision had already been made. There was no room left for debate. Understood, sir, I said, my voice steadier than I felt inside. The channel remained open as Ux addressed the human captain directly. We will send a representative aboard your vessel. I expect assurances of their safety throughout this exchange. You have my word, Commander, came the reply. No harm will come to your officer. I only wish to talk. As preparations began for my transfer aboard a shuttle, I found myself staring once more at that strange vessel on the view screen, its dark hull swallowing the surrounding starlight, utterly still despite everything it had just done. Whatever waited for me aboard that ship, I understood, with a certainty I could not quite explain, that nothing about my understanding of the galaxy would remain the same once I crossed the distance between our two vessels. The shuttle bay doors opened before me, and I stepped forward into the unknown, carrying with me the weight of an entire fleet's uncertain future. The shuttle ride across the gap between our fleet and the strange vessel felt longer than any journey I had taken in my entire career, though the instruments told me it lasted only a few short minutes. I sat alone in the small craft, watching through the viewport as the human ship grew larger and larger, its dark hull revealing more detail the closer I came, though none of that detail made the vessel feel any less foreign to my eyes. A docking clamp engaged with a soft mechanical hum, far gentler than I expected from a ship capable of what I had just witnessed. The airlock cycled, and I stepped through into a corridor that struck me first with how ordinary it felt. I do not know exactly what I had expected, perhaps something imposing, something built to inspire fear or awe. Instead, I found simple metal walls, soft lighting, and the quiet hum of a functioning ship going about its routine business. A woman stood waiting for me just beyond the airlock, dressed in a fitted gray uniform that bore none of the elaborate insignia the Empire favored on its officers. Her hair was tied back, and her expression carried a calm, measured curiosity rather than hostility. "You must be Cor Ashen," she said. "I am Lieutenant Grace Bennett. Captain Marsh is expecting you. Please, follow me." I fell into step beside her, my eyes drifting across every detail of the corridor as we walked, searching for anything that might explain the technology capable of disabling an entire fleet without so much as a visible weapon discharge. I found nothing that gave away such secrets, only the quiet ordinariness of a ship crewed by people going about their duties with a kind of relaxed efficiency that felt strange after the tension aboard my own vessel. "Your ship," I said, unable to hold the question back any longer. "How did it disable 6 warships without firing a single visible shot?" Grace Bennett glanced at me with the faintest hint of a smile. "That is exactly the kind of question the captain will want to discuss with you directly. I am not the right person to explain the technical details." We reached a set of doors that slid open smoothly as we approached, revealing a modest room that appeared to serve as some kind of meeting space. A man sat at the head of a small table, his posture relaxed despite the gravity of the situation that had brought us together. He rose as I entered, extending a hand in a gesture I recognized from Imperial diplomatic archives as a common human greeting. "Captain Ethan Marsh," he said, "thank you for coming aboard, Officer Ashen. I know this cannot have been an easy decision for your commander to make." I hesitated only a moment before returning the gesture, gripping his hand briefly before releasing it. "Commander Ux trusted that I would observe clearly and report accurately. I intend to honor that trust. That is all I would ask of anyone in your position," Marsh said, gesturing toward a chair across from him. "Please, sit. I imagine you have a great many questions." I lowered myself into the offered seat, still acutely aware of how strange this entire situation felt, sitting calmly across from the man whose ship had just crippled an entire Imperial fleet without a single visible act of aggression beyond that initial confrontation. "I have many questions, Captain. I am not certain where to begin." Marsh offered a small, almost tired smile. "Most people in your position start with how. I find that people are usually more interested in the mechanics of what just happened to them than the reasons behind it." "Then I will start there," I admitted. "How did your vessel intercept our warning shot? And how did you disable 6 warships simultaneously without any of our sensors detecting a weapon discharge?" Marsh leaned back slightly in his chair, considering his words carefully before answering. "I am not able to share the specific technical details of our defense and disabling systems, for reasons I hope you can understand. What I can tell you is that our technology does not rely on the same principles that shape most weapon systems used throughout this region of space. We do not need to strike a target with destructive force to render it harmless. We simply need to interrupt the systems that make it dangerous." "That sounds less like a weapon and more like a kind of control," I said. "In some ways, that is exactly what it is," Marsh replied. "We learned a long time ago that the ability to disable a threat without destroying it gives us far more options than simply overwhelming it with force. Destruction is permanent. Restraint gives everyone involved a chance to choose a different outcome." I studied him for a long moment, trying to reconcile the calm, almost thoughtful man sitting across from me with the sheer capability his ship had demonstrated only a short time earlier. "Your empire, if I may call it that, must possess technology far beyond anything we have encountered in this region of space." "We are not an empire," Marsh said, a faint note of something like amusement crossing his features. "We are a single planet, Officer Ashen. A species called humanity, if you have not already gathered that from context. We do not seek to conquer or control other worlds. We seek only to be left in peace, and to ensure that anyone who might threaten that peace understands clearly what the cost of doing so would be." "A single planet," I repeated, struggling to reconcile the scale of what I had witnessed with such a modest description. "Forgive me, Captain, but a single planet capable of fielding a vessel that can disable an entire Imperial fleet without effort seems difficult to believe." I understand your skepticism, Marsh said, but our history has taught us hard lessons about what happens to those who appear weak in the eyes of others. Humanity spent a great deal of its own history locked in conflicts among ourselves, wars that taught us just how quickly things can spiral out of control when strength is uncertain and intentions are unclear. We carried those lessons with us when we finally looked beyond our own world. What lessons, exactly? Marsh was quiet for a moment, his expression growing more serious. That it is far better to be capable of overwhelming force and choose restraint than to be weak and hope for mercy from those who are not. We do not wish for conflict with your empire, Officer Ashen, but we learned long ago never to present ourselves as anything less than fully capable of defending what matters to us. I sat with his words for a long moment, turning them over in my mind. Everything about the encounter, from the interception of our warning shot to the precise, almost gentle disabling of our fleet, began to take on a different shape in light of what he was telling me. This had never been an attempt at destruction. It had been, from the very beginning, an exercise in demonstrating capability while deliberately avoiding unnecessary harm. You said you were sent here to observe, I said. Sent by whom? By my own command structure, much as you answer to yours, Marsh said. Your empire has expanded through this region of space for a long time, absorbing systems and species along the way. We became aware of that expansion some time ago, and it was decided that someone should make contact, quietly, before any further expansion brought your fleets into direct proximity with worlds under our protection. And this encounter today, was it always intended to unfold this way? Marsh considered the question carefully before answering. I hoped it would not come to a direct confrontation, but I will admit, I am not entirely surprised that it did. Pride is a powerful thing, Officer Ashen, and I suspect your commander felt he had little choice but to respond with force once challenged. I thought back to Commander Ux's reaction throughout the encounter, the barely restrained anger, the wounded pride at being addressed so calmly by a lone vessel. Marsh was not wrong in his assessment, and the realization left a strange, uncomfortable feeling settling in my chest. What happens now? I asked. My fleet remains disabled. My commander will need answers to bring back to the Empire's leadership. Your fleet's systems will be restored shortly after you return, Marsh said. We have no interest in stranding your people out here indefinitely. What I would ask, in exchange for that restoration, is that you carry a clear message back to your leadership. Humanity is not seeking territory within this region of space, nor do we wish to interfere with matters that do not concern us. But we will not tolerate any further expansion into systems under our protection, and we are fully capable of enforcing that boundary. A boundary enforced by a single ship, I said, unable to keep a faint note of disbelief from my voice. Marsh's expression grew momentarily distant, as though weighing how much further he was willing to share. This ship represents only a very small fraction of what we are capable of fielding, should the need ever arise. I would prefer your leadership understand that without requiring further demonstration. The weight of his words settled over me slowly, and I found myself studying this calm, unassuming man with new eyes, understanding now that everything I had witnessed today, the interception of our shot, the disabling of our fleet, had likely been executed with only a fraction of the true capability this species possessed. I will carry your message, Captain, I said finally, though I cannot promise how it will be received. That is all I ask, Marsh replied. I hope, for both our people's sake, that it is received with the caution it deserves. As our conversation drew toward its close, Grace Bennett returned to escort me back toward the shuttle bay, and I found myself walking those same ordinary corridors with an entirely different understanding of what they represented. This was not a ship built to inspire fear through appearance or spectacle. It was a ship built by a people who understood, perhaps more deeply than my own empire ever had, that true strength did not require constant demonstration to remain real. As the shuttle doors closed behind me, and I began the short journey back toward my own crippled fleet, I found myself staring out at the strange human vessel one final time, already knowing that the report I carried back would change the course of everything my empire believed about its place within this galaxy. By the time my shuttle docked back within the Vel Karoon, the fleet's systems had already begun returning to life around us, exactly as Captain Marsh had promised. Engines flickered back online. Weapons systems reported full restoration. It was as though the strange, invisible hand that had reached out and disabled 6 warships had simply lifted away, leaving behind no trace of damage, no scars, nothing but the memory of what had happened and the uncomfortable questions it left behind. Commander Ux met me at the shuttle bay himself, an unusual gesture for someone of his rank, though I understood the reasoning behind it the moment I saw the tension still etched across his face. He needed answers immediately, not filtered through layers of protocol and reporting structure. "Ashen," he said, falling into step beside me as we walked toward the bridge. "Report." I relayed everything as clearly and precisely as I could. The conversation with Captain Marsh, the revelation that this single vessel represented only a fraction of humanity's true capability, the message I had been asked to carry back regarding the boundaries of their protected space. Ux listened in silence, his expression darkening with each new detail, though he never once interrupted. When I finished, he was quiet for a long moment, staring straight ahead as we walked. "A single planet," he finally said, almost to himself. "A single species, claiming authority over territory none of our surveys ever indicated belonged to anyone at all. Perhaps our surveys were simply never thorough enough to notice their presence, sir," I offered carefully. "Or perhaps they made certain we would not notice, until they chose to reveal themselves." Ux glanced at me sharply, though there was no anger in the look, only a kind of tired recognition. "You believe this was calculated, that everything about today's encounter, down to the restraint they showed, was designed with a specific outcome in mind." "I believe, sir, that Captain Marsh chose every action today with great deliberation. Nothing about the encounter felt accidental to me." We reached the bridge, and Ux immediately called for a secure channel to Imperial Command, a process that would take some time, given the distances involved. In the meantime, the crew worked quietly around us, running diagnostics, confirming the restoration of every system, and trying to process the strange, unsettling nature of an encounter that had ended without a single Imperial casualty, yet left every one of us feeling as though something fundamental about our place in the galaxy had shifted. It took the better part of a day before word came back from Imperial Command, and by then, the report of our encounter had already begun spreading through official channels, distorted and reshaped with each retelling, as such things often are. By the time the council convened to discuss the matter directly, I found myself summoned, along with Commander Ux, to provide a first-hand account before some of the highest-ranking officials within the Empire's governing structure. I had never stood before the council in all my years of service, and the weight of that room settled over me the moment I entered. Rows of officials from a dozen different species sat arranged in a wide, circular chamber, their attention fixed on us as we took our positions before them. At the center of the gathering sat Grand Counselor Petra Voss Halkin, an elder stateswoman whose reputation for careful, measured judgment had guided the Empire through several difficult periods over her long tenure. "Commander Ux," she began, her voice carrying easily through the chamber, "you have brought before this council an account that many here find difficult to accept. A single vessel, disabling an entire battle fleet without inflicting a single casualty. I would ask that you and your officer provide a full and honest account, regardless of how uncomfortable the details may be." Ux stepped forward and delivered his report with the same measured precision he brought to every duty throughout his career, sparing no detail, however difficult it might be to hear. When he finished, the chamber fell into a tense murmur, officials leaning toward one another, exchanging quiet, uneasy words. "Officer Ashen," Counselor Halkin said, turning her attention toward me, "you spoke directly with this human captain. I would like to hear your impressions firsthand." I stepped forward, acutely aware of the weight of every eye in that chamber resting upon me. "Counselor, my impression is that Captain Marsh and his crew possess capabilities far beyond anything our empire currently understands. More concerning than the technology itself, however, was the restraint with which it was used. This was not an attack meant to destroy us. It was a demonstration, carefully calculated to prove capability while avoiding unnecessary harm. To what end? To establish a boundary, Counselor. Captain Marsh made clear that his people do not seek territory or conflict with our empire, but that they will not tolerate further expansion into space they consider protected. He also made clear that the vessel we encountered represents only a small fraction of what his people are capable of fielding, should the need arise. A ripple of unease moved through the chamber at that statement, and I watched as several officials exchanged worried glances. It was clear that many within that room had entered expecting a report of some minor territorial dispute, easily resolved through the usual channels of imperial diplomacy or force. What they were hearing instead painted a picture of something far larger, far more uncertain than anything the Empire had faced in recent memory. A younger counselor near the back of the chamber rose to speak, his voice sharp with the kind of confidence that came from having never personally witnessed the events being described. This account seems exaggerated. No single vessel could disable 6 warships without significant destructive force. I suspect our officers, however experienced, may have misjudged the situation under the pressure of an unfamiliar encounter. Commander Ux's jaw tightened visibly at the accusation, though he kept his voice level as he responded. Counselor, I have served this empire for over 20 years. I have commanded fleets through conflicts, far more chaotic than what we face today. I assure you, there was no misjudgment. Every system aboard 6 warships failed simultaneously, without a single visible weapon discharge, and every one of those systems was restored the moment our fleet's representative returned from speaking directly with their commanding officer. If you doubt the accuracy of this report, I invite you to review the full sensor logs yourself. The younger counselor fell silent under the weight of Ux's response, though the skepticism in his expression remained. Counselor Halkin raised a hand, calling for quiet, as murmurs continued to ripple through the chamber. Regardless of how difficult this account may be to accept, she said, we cannot afford to dismiss first-hand testimony from experienced officers simply because it challenges our assumptions about the balance of power in this region of space. If even a fraction of what has been described here today is accurate, then we are facing a species whose capabilities we do not yet fully understand, and whose intentions, while seemingly restrained thus far, remain uncertain in the long term. The chamber fell into a heavier silence at those words, the reality of the situation settling more firmly over those gathered. I watched as officials who had entered that room with confident assumptions about imperial supremacy began quietly reconsidering everything they thought they understood about the galaxy beyond their borders. What do you recommend, Commander? Halkin asked, turning back toward Ux. Ux considered his answer carefully before speaking. I recommend caution, Counselor. This species has shown restraint today, despite possessing more than enough capability to have ended our fleet entirely. I do not believe further aggression on our part would end favorably, and I believe attempting to test the boundaries they have described would only invite consequences we are not prepared to face. I recommend we respect the boundary they have outlined and consider opening careful, measured diplomatic contact rather than further military posturing. A long silence followed his words, broken eventually by Counselor Halkin's measured response. Then let it be recorded that this council acknowledges the boundary described by the vessel encountered within the 9th Border Fleet's patrol sector. Further military action within that region is suspended pending additional information. I will authorize a diplomatic envoy to attempt further contact with this species, humanity, through appropriate and careful channels. The council session continued for some time after that, discussing logistics and protocols for the diplomatic effort that would follow. Though I found my attention drifting, my mind returning again and again to my conversation with Captain Marsh aboard that quiet, unassuming vessel. I thought of his calm demeanor, his careful choice of words, the way he had spoken of restraint not as weakness, but as a deliberate choice made by a species that understood exactly how much destructive power it held in reserve. In the weeks that followed, reports began trickling in from other sectors along the Empire's outer border. Isolated sightings of similar vessels appearing briefly before vanishing again without incident. Each report carried the same unsettling details: no jump flare, no detectable approach, simply a sudden presence followed by an equally sudden departure, as though these ships were quietly patrolling boundaries the Empire had never even known existed. I found myself reassigned some months later to a newly formed diplomatic liaison office, tasked with assisting in the slow, careful process of establishing formal contact with humanity's government, a process that moved with far more caution and humility than any diplomatic effort the Empire had undertaken in generations. Gone were the assumptions of easy dominance that had characterized so many of our previous first encounters with unfamiliar species. In their place sat a quiet, uneasy respect, born from the memory of 6 warships rendered helpless without a single life lost. It was during one of the early diplomatic exchanges that I learned something that reshaped my understanding of that day entirely. The vessel we had encountered, the one that had so effortlessly disabled our fleet, had not been sent as a show of overwhelming force at all. It had been, according to the human diplomats who eventually shared the detail, something closer to a routine patrol, a single ship on a standard assignment along the edges of monitored space. What we had perceived as a deliberate and calculated test of our capabilities had, in truth, simply been the natural response of a single crew following standard procedure when confronted by an unfamiliar fleet. That realization settled over me with a weight I had not expected. If a routine patrol vessel, operating under standard procedure, was capable of disabling an entire Imperial battle fleet without effort, then the true scale of humanity's full military capability remained something none of us could yet fully comprehend. Commander Ux, when I shared this detail with him during one of our infrequent correspondences, responded with a simple observation that I have carried with me ever since. He said that for centuries, the Empire had operated under the quiet assumption that we stood at the top of a clearly understood hierarchy of power within this region of the galaxy. That assumption, built over generations of expansion and conquest, had shaped every decision our leadership made, every strategy our fleets employed, every assumption our diplomats carried into negotiations with newly discovered species. That single encounter, brief as it had been, had shattered that assumption entirely. I do not know what the future holds for the relationship between our two peoples. The diplomatic efforts continue, slow and careful, built on a foundation of mutual caution rather than the easy confidence that had once defined imperial expansion. Reports continue to filter in from scattered sectors along our border, quiet sightings of human vessels observing, patrolling, occasionally making brief contact before withdrawing again, always calm, always measured, never seeking conflict, yet never showing the slightest hesitation when conflict was forced upon them. Sometimes, late in my shifts within the liaison office, I find myself thinking back to that day, to the stillness of that unmarked vessel hanging silently among the stars, to the calm, steady voice of Captain Ethan Marsh explaining, almost apologetically, why restraint mattered more to his people than raw destructive power. I think of the quiet lesson embedded within that entire encounter, one that our empire had needed centuries to finally learn. Strength, true strength, was never about how loudly one announced their capability to the galaxy. It was about the quiet confidence of knowing exactly what one was capable of, and choosing, deliberately and carefully, when that capability truly needed to be shown. The empire I serve is no longer the same empire that entered that encounter believing itself untouchable. We have become, in the months since, a more careful people, more measured in our expansion, more cautious in our assumptions about the unknown reaches of space, still waiting beyond our borders. And somewhere out there, along the edges of monitored space, I know that humanity continues its quiet watch, unassuming, unhurried, yet fully prepared should the need ever arise again to remind us just how unprepared we truly were.